The moment you stop explaining yourself to people, everything changes. Because silence reveals truths, arguments always hide completely. Most people mistakenly believe silence means weakness. Because they never understood how terrifying emotional control actually becomes. Loud people desperately seek power through noise. But psychologically powerful people understand silence controls every emotional battlefield. Have you noticed people suddenly panic whenever you stop reacting emotionally and quietly disappear into yourself completely? Because silence creates uncertainty, and uncertainty quietly destroys the comfortable illusion people had about controlling you. They understood your patterns, your emotions, your reactions. But silence suddenly removes the map from their hands. Stage 1. The withdrawal effect. Your absence quietly begins exposing relationships built entirely on convenience and dependency. The painful truth appears quickly. Many people only valued your energy because you always made access effortless. You replied instantly, you stayed available, you sacrificed peace, and unknowingly trained others to expect everything. Then suddenly one day you become silent, and everyone feels the freezing weight of your emotional absence. Silence shocks people because it removes free emotional access and forces them to confront uncomfortable uncertainty. Alone, some people will immediately accuse you of changing. Because silence exposes how deeply they depended on you. They miss your reactions, your reassurance, your emotional labor. Not necessarily the person you actually became. This realization hurts deeply because silence often reveals painful truths. Conversations successfully distracted you from before. Stage 2. The power shift begins. The moment silence stops being pain and becomes psychological discipline. Suddenly you stop chasing, stop explaining, stop proving yourself, and something psychologically powerful quietly changes. Inside, silence teaches emotional discipline. Because every ignored impulse slowly transforms weakness into frightening psychological self-control. People begin noticing your silence. Because emotionally unavailable things suddenly become strangely valuable to human nature. The attention you desperately chased before suddenly returns. Because silence forces people to notice missing energy. But the dangerous question remains, will you break your silence before discovering who genuinely values your presence? Stage 3. The silence test begins because absence quietly reveals who truly values you without constant reminders. Some people will suddenly become unusually kind. Because silence interrupted the emotional comfort they casually enjoyed before. Others will grow cold, defensive, and strangely distant. Because silence exposes hidden entitlement. People desperately conceal the most manipulative. People often panic first. Because silence removes their ability to emotionally predict your reactions. They may suddenly text more, call unexpectedly, or pretend concern simply to regain emotional access. Again, this moment becomes dangerous. Because loneliness often tricks people into abandoning powerful emotional boundaries. Too quickly. Real psychological power begins when silence stops feeling lonely and starts feeling deeply peaceful. Instead, completely, because peace creates clarity, and clarity reveals exactly who constantly drained your emotional energy before. Unknowingly, you finally realize some relationships survived only because you carried their emotional weight for everyone constantly. Stage 4. Emotional detachment begins when silence no longer seeks validation from people misunderstanding your worth. You stop fearing distance because emotionally mature people never require constant chasing to stay connected naturally. Silence teaches an uncomfortable lesson. People respect boundaries they secretly hate, but ultimately cannot emotionally manipulate. Suddenly, your emotional world becomes quieter, cleaner, and strangely free from exhausting unnecessary emotional noise. Everywhere, some people will quietly disappear because your silence removed the benefits they selfishly enjoyed before completely let them leave. Because forced relationships often destroy peace much faster than loneliness ever could alone. The strongest people quietly understand silence protects energy. Arguments usually waste defending misunderstood intentions. Endlessly everywhere, you no longer explain every decision because true confidence never desperately begs for emotional approval. Outside, ironically, silence often makes people finally listen because absence amplifies words they previously ignored repeatedly. Before you begin realizing, emotional peace feels infinitely better than constantly proving yourself to difficult people endlessly. But silence only becomes true power after you stop fearing who leaves. When everything becomes quiet. Stage 5. The return effect begins because silence quietly forces people to confront your missing emotional presence. People often notice your worth only after silence removes the comfort of always having you nearby. Suddenly forgotten conversations become louder because silence amplifies memories people comfortably ignored before. Without resistance entirely, some will finally apologize while others quietly disappear because silence reveals intentions words successfully disguised before the truth becomes. Painfully obvious genuine people move closer while selfish people naturally drift farther away. Silence never destroys healthy relationships because real connection survives distance, uncertainty, and temporary emotional withdrawal. Naturally weak connections collapse quickly because they secretly depended upon your endless effort, emotional labor, and patience. This painful separation becomes necessary because growth demands removing emotional noise, blocking inner peace completely. Forever you finally understand silence was never punishment, it was emotional protection disguised as painful distance. Before stop fearing silence, because emotional maturity begins exactly where constant explanations finally come to an end. The strongest presence inside any room often belongs to the person speaking the least emotionally, always, because silence communicates confidence, certainty, emotional control, and something deeply intimidating. People rarely understand completely when people cannot emotionally predict you anymore. Their curiosity quietly begins replacing careless disrespect. Immediately, everywhere you stop becoming emotionally available for everyone, and suddenly, your time feels deeply valuable again, completely protecting. Peace eventually becomes addictive because chaos no longer feels exciting after emotional clarity finally arrives. The real transformation happens quietly because confidence grows strongest inside moments nobody else can visibly measure. Walk away from emotional chaos without guilt, because peace always costs something painful before becoming freedom. Become someone silence protects, not someone noise constantly controls. Through emotional weakness and endless explanation anymore. If emotional peace matters more than endless approval, subscribe, because this journey was built for transformation. Master silence protect your energy and quietly become someone impossible for disrespectful people to emotionally control.